I'll set the recording. Okay, so welcome, Harley. It's lovely to have you here. So just to give everyone a bit of background there, Harley is currently a PhD candidate at the Institute for Northern Studies at the University of Highlands and Islands. This presentation we're about to hear will expand on Harley's MLit dissertation, which was entitled Interpreting Old Norse Magic, a Thematic Analysis of Seidr According to Runic Inscriptions. So while Harley remains very much interested in Seidr practices and runology, her PhD research has shifted to focus on the study of non-violent Norse-Iberian exchanges. So very excited to hear your research, Harley. Off you go.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Slideshow. Okay, so this presentation is based on my findings from my master's dissertation, which explored Seidr through a thematic analysis of a selected data set of runic inscriptions. So I will clarify up front that my original proposal aimed at exploring the entire runic corpus, but due to the constraints of word count and time, I had to narrow my focus, and those same limitations apply here. So I will focus on a select few examples in order to present a revised definition of Seidr in Viking Age society. So I'll begin by setting the stage, providing some background on Seidr and placing it within broader medieval magical traditions. The goal of this presentation is to examine and evaluate the findings from my dissertation. I aim to explore the pervasive influence of Seidr in Viking Age societal structures and ultimately refine Neil Price's definition of Seidr, which was, and I quote, the extension of the mind and its faculties. So Seidr existed within a broader, highly interconnected web of magical traditions across ancient Germanic and Nordic worlds, but also shared many parallels with other Indo-European shamanistic traditions, such as those found in Siberian or Central Asian cultures, where trance and ecstatic journeys into the spiritual realms were common. So most notably, Seidr is suggested to have been influenced by Sami shamanism and the Noai. So both Seidr practitioners and Sami Noaidi were specialists in their respective societies. So they acted as mediators or go-betweens between human and supernatural forces. They served similar purpose in being called up for divination, healing, controlling, or influencing non-material forces, so the weather, spirits, or other enemies, other humans. So as such, both traditions include capacities of influence. Practitioners were also called upon for protection and to help with social crises and to combat misfortune and threats. So additionally, both traditions employed staffs of iron and wood, though in the Nordic world, the staff held a far more prominent and emblematic role. Another parallel lies in practices intended to induce trance-like states. So in Nordic context, this may have involved chanting or high-pitched singing known as galdr, which I'm sure you've heard all about already. And that's sort of rhythmic incantation. So this bears some comparison with the Sami Noaidi's use of the ritual drum, which was central to achieving altered states of consciousness. The possibility that intoxicants or narcotics assisted these states has been raised by several scholars, but direct evidence is minimal. So in the Viking world, only a few finds hint at the possibility. So for instance, there's henbane in grave 4 at Firkat and some cannabis seeds in the Oseberg ship burial. So the placement and the purpose of these substances remains debated, and it might never be conclusively resolved. But it is plausible that their association with ritual reflects later interpretative tropes, influenced by more modern understandings of magical practice, such as the use of mushrooms to facilitate altered states of awareness. So Neil Price also highlighted several other forms of magic in the Viking world. So I've mentioned Galdr already, the high-pitched chanting thought to channel the power of the tongue. There's also Gander, which is related to the concept of Ginnungagap, which Jan de Vries described as one of the primal forces from which worlds were forced and formed. Um, and which is explicitly described alongside, say, that in the Volupspa. Another technique is, and I'm probably going to murder the pronunciation of this, Utiseta, which literally means sitting out at night in a sacred or a liminal place, like, for instance, sat near a burial mound, to communicate with the dead and gain some sort of spiritual power. And finally, there is Trolldommer, which is seemingly a more sinister practice, and it's associated with harmful magic and intended to bring about misfortune. So what becomes apparent here is that in the Viking world, there was an understanding of light and dark magic, suggesting an early understanding of the differing moral and spiritual dimensions within magical practices that we can still recognize today. So to summarize, these practices suggest that Seidr was neither static nor isolated, but it was part of this wider network of magical traditions across the circumpolar world. And it's just one of the expressions of belief found across Northern Eurasia. So I was inspired by Niels Organ Nielsen's essays on runic inscriptions containing magic formulae. And because of that, my dissertation explored a selection of runic inscriptions from Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. This data set was chosen based on inscriptions that were dated between the Proto-Norse, Viking, and medieval periods, so roughly AD 500 to AD 1500. I also aimed to include a diverse range of inscriptions, so I didn't want to limit myself to just runestones themselves. So I approached these inscriptions thematically. I transliterated the texts and I analysed the meaning of individual words to identify recurring motifs. The main themes that emerged were curse, healing, prophecy, and protection. So my findings revealed the highly paradoxical nature of, say, the practice and the perceptions of practitioners. So curse formula revealed the role of Seidr in upholding communal values and funerary customs. It was somewhat accepted as a mechanism of social control and norm enforcement. So in this sense, say the practice and practitioners were simultaneously accepted and condemned, reflecting this kind of fluidity among Norse belief systems amidst a growing Christian influence. And it reflects that complex interplay of fear and reverence and cultural identity. Healing formula reveal the role of Seidr in more domestic contexts and the tools utilised to perform healing rituals, and the collective understanding of the necessity of Seidr in given situations. This is indicative that Seidr practice and practitioners were almost a necessary evil in certain situations. Prophetic formula revealed the lived anxieties and the shared experiences and their impact on Viking Age cultural memory. So it prompted this reliance on, say, the practice and practitioners to influence fate. There is a paradoxical tension here in that, say, their practice under established practitioners or those with a reputation for altering fate were more socially accepted, having kind of proven themselves to be useful, while the use of Seidr by lay people was more controversial. And then finally, protection formula revealed that there were tangible dangers in society that prompted people to take such extreme measures to safeguard what they valued. And the practical need for protection made Seidr not only acceptable, but in some cases expected or relied upon whenever circumstances permitted. So my findings presented a bit of a multifaceted picture of Seidr as both a practical and a symbolic force within Viking Age society. And I began to examine the ways in which Seidr operated across communal, domestic, spiritual, and protective contexts. So by categorizing runic inscriptions into curse, healing, formula, healing formula, prophetic formula, and protection formula, my analysis demonstrated the diversity of the functions of Seidr. This sort of approach illustrated the integration of Seidr into everyday life, and its role in maintaining social cohesion within Viking Age society. I also began to explore the psychosomatic and mental dimensions of Seidr, particularly in healing and protection contexts. Generally speaking, my findings did align with Price's definition of Seidr, particularly in externalizing the innate, the intangible, psychological states of fear and anxiety, and as well as intent and belief that shaped human experience. However, upon reflection, it's clear that my dissertation began to explore psychological states. There was some limit. There was a limited exploration of the performative and the altered states aspects of Seidr that were kind of central to Price's definition. So hopefully in providing this background information, I've addressed that slightly. My dissertation also overlooked controversial aspects of the perception of practitioners, particularly their association with the taboo, that gender deviance and that social transgression from established norms. And then finally, a significant shortcoming lies in the lack of comparison with other forms of evidence, particularly Old Norse literary sources and archaeological material, such as burials and Seidr staffs, which would provide richer contextualization and offer a more, I suppose, holistic understanding of the complexity of Seidr in shaping societal structures and norms. So I'm now going to tackle these limitations to offer an improved version of Price's definition. So although oftentimes it's not directly referred to as, say, the practice, and we, of course, have to be conscious of the biases within Old Norse poetry and literature, there are several occasions in literature where, say, the practice and practitioners are addressed, which creates, I suppose, a more nuanced understanding of perceptions of magic in Viking Age society. So, for instance, in Voluspa 2020, I think it's 22 and 23, the figure of Gulveig introduces Seidr to the gods, and they react with violence, trying to kill her by burning her 3 times. She survives each time and later becomes a seeress named Heather, and she's known for practicing Seidr and being popular with wicked women. This narrative demonstrates that Seidr was seen as a powerful but dangerous force that caused conflict between the established hierarchy of the gods. So based on this narrative, it's plausible to suggest that negative perceptions of Seidr and Seidr practitioners were shaped by how the practice is portrayed in mythology and its origins in myth. Ironically, in Baldur's drama, Odin uses Seidr to raise a dead seeress, and it reveals this kind of paradoxical relationship that he has with, say, the practice. So he is often identified as a sorcerer. However, his actions remain quite complex. He transgresses these gender norms and taboo boundaries despite his role as the All-Father. But I believe it is that divine status and authority that allow him to bypass that social stigma that others would have faced for those same practices. Arguably, this narrative can be understood as using Seidr to uncover knowledge or prophesize and to heal. So these are 2 themes that were reflected in runic inscriptions. This suggests that Seidr wasn't always seen as evil or forbidden, but rather that its legitimacy depended on the identity and the perceived power of that practitioner. So in Viking Age society, this might reflect how certain acts that would be considered socially deviant could still be respected, or at least, at the very least, accepted when carried out by those in positions of authority or with divine power. In Eirik Saga, the prophetess Thorbjorg performs a ritual prophecy to reveal the fate of settlements. She is a travelling volva and she moves between communities, which suggests that she had a significant level of autonomy and social value. Her presence is clearly sought out in times of uncertainty, which kind of indicates this unique authority among, say, the practitioners. There are similar themes in runic inscriptions, which demonstrates to me that the use of Seidr and the consul of practitioners were accepted in given contexts. So although they're often seen as these liminal figures, they could be temporarily integrated into social hierarchies. So Old Norse literature often emphasised the use of wooden and iron staffs in the performance of Seidr and can be seen as a distinctive mark of the profession. I examined some wooden staffs throughout my dissertation and I won't discuss them here. So instead, I'll focus on some iron and bronze staffs. So according to Neil Price, there are 26 known Viking Age burials in Norway, Sweden and Denmark that contain iron staffs. Just like this one pictured from grave BJ 660, which are widely believed to be linked to the practice of sorcery. These staffs are often associated with the volur, which is a term in and of itself meaning staff bearer or wand carrier. Although there are variations in the form of staffs, which suggest that they were likely used by different individuals for different purposes. As tools for spinning or weaving seidr, these staffs reflect the close ties between magical practice and feminine-coded activities in Viking Age society. Their inclusion in richly furnished graves indicates that seidr practitioners could possess significant social status and authority. So, for example, burial BJ 845 contains luxury items. So they found beaver fur-lined cloak, silver embroidered silk headband, exotic pendants, some unique brooches, alongside a knife with some silverware, and a decorated staff, which was cradled in the woman's hands, which is perhaps symbolic as that being the tool of her trade. Such a rich burial would suggest that this woman, this practitioner, served her society well, and likely held quite an important and significant and respected role within her community. But as a Seidr practitioner, she might have been consulted for healing, prophecy, or spiritual guidance, all of which would be crucial to maintaining social and cosmic order. The care that's taken in her burial, including the deliberate placement of the staff and other symbolic objects, reflects both gratitude for her service and a recognition of her power, even in death, which to me indicates that such practitioners, though we see them as kind of liminal figures and outside of the norm, they could occupy positions of considerable respect and authority. Yet it seems that the staff itself is not intrinsically magic. As Leszek Gardella noted, the iron staff became a tool of sorcery only when its bearer decided to use it in such a manner, and when other participants of the ritual believed in his or her power and the magic with which the Seidr paraphernalia were enchanted. So it was all real because the minds of Viking Age people considered it real. Their belief validated the reality of the magic and consequently the authority of the person wielding it. The practitioner's power, therefore, wasn't inherent, but the result of collective belief and social construction. So this suggests that fear and reverence towards practitioners were contingent on this kind of shared cultural perception, which reinforces the idea that the reality of magic and the authority it bestowed were not only validated by the social consensus, but also maintained through socially contingent and controlled fear. So the evidence that I've explored throughout this presentation suggests that practitioners in Viking Age society had no fixed place, and instead kind of existed on the margins. I've created this visual to kind of illustrate and demonstrate the fluid and autonomous role of practitioners. So I've used dashes to represent the transience of practitioners as they kind of move through the social hierarchies of the free people. This transience may have been a factor that made them indispensable and easily kind of summoned to various social spheres. While their interactions with the elite might suggest elevated social status, it's likely that practitioners ultimately returned back to those margins where they held a distinct category of their own. Given the limited agency of the unfree, slaves and captives, I'd hazard a guess to say it's unlikely they would have sought out practitioners. As Price remarked, there is no sense in which sorceresses everywhere enjoyed the same status or place in society. Their status and role likely varied depending on context, location, or circumstance, indicative of a kind of fluid and a transient existence, one of instability and uncertainty, curated by collective belief. So to return to Price's definition of Seidr as the extension of the mind and its faculties, the evidence that I've explored throughout this presentation suggests that Seidr was not psychological or mental in nature on its own, but it was also a performative, material, socially constructed, and above all, contingent on belief. It existed in this interplay between ritual and reputation and perception. It was an act shaped by context, legitimized through this collective belief, and bounded by the expectations, fears, and hierarchies already established in Viking Age society. So to Price's definition, I add, Seidr was an extension of the mind and its faculties, a socially constructed reality contingent on collective belief. Thank you for listening.